Well, I'll soon start the last leg of my trip. Well, actually, it's the last leg of my trips. It's going to be the last kind of chapter or page in this book about Whiskey Blue and me. And it feels a little bit anticlimactic with, all these really great experiences I had over the last 2 weeks, not to mention on my previous trips. But I think that anticlimactic thing is kind of a momentary feeling because the overall picture is more um, one of great satisfaction and kind of feeling really good about having embarked on this adventure, which would kind of qualify as follow your bliss, because that's what it is all about. And looking back, how this whole thing started, I remember it was this boyhood dream that suddenly popped up after, I don't know, decades of hibernation. A boyhood dream that I dreamt when I was 8 years old, and at that time, back in Germany, I just did not see any way of realizing that. It was not even a dream, a fantasy, it was utopia, up in the sky, unreachable. And I think I owe it to the passion for flying that the dream didn't die, it just went to sleep for all these years. And finally, well, it popped up again. And it was in a kind of an unusual place where I had to give a short, review, CV kind of style review of my life when I applied for a workshop in visual arts. And when I, told about the stories of my life, what I did, of course the passion of flying came up. And then the guy asked, well, what would you do now with respect to your passion if time and money and was no issue? You could do whatever you want. And I didn't think, and I don't know where it came from, but that was the time when the dream popped up again, because I said spontaneously, no thinking, it must have come from down here, well, I would buy an old tail dragger and do a barnstorming trip for 3 months, camping under the wing across the United States. Buff, there it was. But even at that time, it wasn't any more real. It just happened to be up there. A little bit of a change, well, no, actually, the big change came when a good friend of mine, who was also present at my presentation in this visual arts workshop, asked me a couple of months later what happened to my dream. And I was kind of confused. And I said, well, what dream do you mean? Well, she said, well, you mentioned this dream about flying this tail dragger thing across the United States. And I said, well, there's nothing changed. I don't have the money. It just doesn't work. And she insisted, and that was a great thing because that made the big change in explaining to me the difference between my very German attitude, which is kind of, safe in good times, so you have in the bad times, with her Argentinian philosophy, which is enjoy the good times because you will always manage during bad times. And I think the dream popped up and said, you got to pay attention to what she said. Anyway, I started looking around and dreaming a little bit more realistically. And in the end, I said, well, there's no damage if I just look around how much is a 170, because it had to be a 170. Because the dream was about, having read a book that described the journey of a young pilot taking a 170 from the factory up to Fairbanks in Alaska to help a family member with his work as a bush pilot up there. So I started looking into 170s and educated myself and so on and so forth. And it was interesting because I felt all this energy coming out. And, every day I would go up and look at Barnstormers and read more articles in Backcountry Pilot and watching YouTube videos. And it was kind of generating a lot of energy, a lot of good vibes. And I think, and I give that to you, that's one of the signs that you are onto something that's important to you, you yourself, not to the way you want to present yourself in life or you want to play. No, it has to do with your personality. What is it that drives you, that really is important? Is that feeling of intense energy and focus and going at it. It doesn't matter whether it's half an hour a day or whether it's all day or this keeps on going for a month. It's important to pay attention, to realize, well, something is going on here. Anyway, I kept looking and fantasizing and dreaming and thinking, well, what would I do and how would this all work out? And I went to Oshkosh, and of course, that was oil in the fire, as they say. It really was great. I got to meet a couple of 170 owners and saw all these beautiful birds and, just being involved in that atmosphere with those vibes. It was just a real boost. More, more, more. I got my tail dragger endorsement just to make sure, in case I found one in my price range, which I was willing to kind of dedicate to this project, which was a small nest egg that I felt I had still available to do something that was important to me. Well, and then about 5 years ago, I found Whiskey Blue. And with the help of a good friend of, Greg at Bushwagon East, I went through all the hoops, and it was then when the first obstacles showed up. Turns out that as a non-citizen, you cannot own or operate an unregistered airplane in the U.S. But, there's an Argentinian proverb also which says with every law that comes out, there's a way to cheat the law, quote unquote cheat, to circumnavigate, as you would say. So I found that way, and, it was a small obstacle, and I was still so full of enthusiasm that let's go. Bought the plane, got checked out, flew a little bit on my own, and then I went on my first trip. And since the whole process had taken a lot longer than I thought, it was rather than 3 months, it was 2.5 weeks across New England. And man, this was absolutely spectacular. I had luck with the weather. All along, wherever I landed, I met wonderful people. And I had this feeling that whenever I talked to people who were not in aviation, like people who would wander around the airport because there was something going on and they saw the plane and they came by and asked me questions, there was this kind of an interaction which sparked something in them. Because I told them, like I'm telling now, that this idea of following that's something that's important to me, that's, the blissful part of life. And they felt inspired. And when I sensed that, it was like, well, I guess I'm onto something that's not only important for you, but maybe I should convey this message and inspire people somehow to follow their bliss. It doesn't have to be flying. It could be anything you want, but something that's important. And so when I got back, I said, look, that was wonderful, but I really want to do a little bit longer trip and go further out west. And since there was a little bit of money left in the piggy bank, so to speak, I said, well, I come back in the spring of 2020, and then in the spring, I fly back along the southern coast, and maybe I make it to Texas or maybe even to New Mexico, who knows. And then I turn around, come back after 4, 6, 7 weeks, and then it's the time to sell the plane. Because not living in the US, owning a plane on a different continent, it didn't really jive with me. Because with all my gliders, I lived like 20, 15 minutes, so every time I wanted to, I could drive out, fiddle it, polish it, make some adjustments, improvements, mods, whatever. And that's the way I would like to live with an airplane. So the idea was to sell it, but then you know what happened. Well, pandemic came, and then we had some problems with the engine, and it was draining money. So there and then was the time when the doubts came up. Well, what on earth have I gotten myself into, you know? And then there was the question of, or the necessity rather, that I had to have an overhaul on the 0300, more money, and but in a sense it was like, you know, I had put my toe in the water and I just fell into the water by accident. And now I had to swim at least a little bit to go back, you know, to solid ground or whatever. But this is the time, like I said, when the doubts came in. Every once in a while, I reminded myself what was the idea in the first place. And at my age at that time, I was 68, 69, I thought, well, you know, some of my friends, they didn't live that long. They retired with 65, and then came the big decline, and suddenly there was an accident or there was some illness or whatever, and they never made it. Or, you know, you never know how long it's going to last. And that was important because it reminded me what's important, and as long as I can manage, I will move forward. Well, we decided at that time that it was better to upgrade rather than to overhaul, and that's when the big improvement program for Whiskey Blue happened. Oh man, there were sleepless nights. The demons came in the morning, you know, in the morning meaning like at 3 a.m. when I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep again. Always trying to figure out, well, is this the right thing, and how do I ever get out of it, and all these parts and stuff and so on. Well, it was intense, and but every once in a while, I would kind of, at least momentarily, meaning for a day or two, sometimes if I was lucky, even for a week, I would have some experience. I already had moved to Spain, France, close to Spain at that point. And those little events were like meeting somebody on the glider port or meeting somebody in a little mountain strip with a Savage Slin, a Slin Savage Cup. And I said, yeah, that's it. Just stick it through, just bear with it. You still can do it. And, you know, like good old Richard Bach wrote in one of his books about barnstormers, that, you know, all these people who really have a passion for flying, they put their last cent into their J3 or their Stearman or whatever they happen to fly, because that's what the meaning of their life is. And it's kind of difficult, of course, at some point to put that, you know, that happened like, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and incorporate that into one's own life where all this, well, but, you know, this and that and the other. Well, in the end, we finished the upgrade, and I said, well, you know what? The plane is in great shape. Now is the time to sell. And thank God to my good friend who said, now, this would be the utmost shame if now that you have this wonderful plane, a bird that a lot of people would love to have, a 170 with the big upgrades and, you know, in great shape and everything, you have to do this trip. This is the culmination. This is the closure of all you ever wanted to do. And I let him convince me. And I went this trip last year. And it was a trip about being for almost 6 weeks with the bird, flying from Boston all the way out west to Idaho, Montana, Utah, Colorado, and see all these wonderful places that I had dreamed of and watched on YouTube and experience them myself. And once I was out there, everything else vanished. All the demons had gone from one day to the next. I was in that moment. I had to land on a 1,500-foot strip at 5,000 feet somewhere in Idaho. No time to worry about, well, what's next, and is there, you know, enough, will the next medical work out, and all these kind of things. It was just phenomenal. And again, every once in a while you would meet somebody, talk to them, tell them their stories, and they look at you and say, "You did what? Well, that's amazing. Maybe I should think about something like that." And again, like I said before, you should. No matter whether it's a bike ride across the country or flying your little airplane to Alaska or hiking the Appalachian Trail. If that's what really is driving you, be serious about it. It it infuses so much energy and so much, well, in the interaction with people, with life, with all aspects of life. And so I came back and I said, well, that was it. Now it's time to sell it. I put it up for sale, and there was really not much of response. And we didn't really know why. And of course, that was the time when George, the good old guy who would always sit on my shoulder and say, "See, I told you, that's not going to work out, and you're going to go bankrupt," and all this kind of stuff. Well, and here I am. You know, did my last trip, and for all I know, this is going to be my last trip. But who knows? Once you embark on these kind of trips, on these kind of journeys, you got to be open. And not only in the moment when you meet new people and they have a crazy idea about what you should do or how you should do something. That's of course when you should take them seriously and maybe try some of those things. No, but also in a longer perspective. Well, this is the plan for now, but I'm ready and willing to change it if the opportunity arises. So with that in mind, I will pack up and fly back home base 28 Mike, Cranland, near Boston. Put the bird, the Whiskey Blue, in its hangar. Clean it up, make it ready for the next person to own it, the next steward to keep the 55 born, 55 born, almost 70-year-old beauty for the next 10, 15 years. So that's what I wanted to tell you today before I hop in and take off. Well, maybe the next to last time. I got one more fuel stop to make. Thanks for watching.